My name's Joseph Michael Lopez. I was born in New York City in 1973 in Washington Heights on 175th Street, and I'm a Leica photographer. I think photography, the kind of photography that interests me, that makes me wake up in the morning, is work that is felt. It's gestural, it's poetic, it's lit and punctuated with light in a way where it makes me rethink my relationship to reality, you know. Black and white suits my character and my sensitivity to human beings, and the strengths of black and white is that you can make a timeless image. I've been shooting analog black and white with a Leica M for about 20 years. This new Q2 Monochrom is the next chapter of my black and white practice.
Joseph Michael Lopez. Let's welcome him to the program. His works appeared in the New Yorker, the Sunday Review of the New York Times, Leica Fotografie International, just to name a few. He's been in numerous museum exhibitions, and I can tell you he's always an engaging conversation. Joseph, good to see you. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Tom, and thank you to Leica for this opportunity and this platform. I want to say first, give a shout out to Jason and Denny, who worked tirelessly and brought their creative genius into producing and directing that video. So shout out to Denny and Jason. Thank you, brothers.
Thanks, Joseph. It definitely gives, I think, a small inkling to the dedication that you show in your photography, the practice that you put in place. And we're going to get into that. But before we start looking at your work, I felt like it might be good to take a step back and let the audience find out a little bit more about your beginnings, and specifically in terms of starting as a cinematographer. Could you let us know kind of how you made that, how that came about? How did cinematography start for you? And then how did you make the transition into photography?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up surfing competitively, and you know, kind of was born in New York, raised in South Florida, and spent most of my teenage, about 12 years of my teenage upbringing in the ocean. And then personal life unfolded in such a way where at about 22 years old, I started rethinking a lot of things, and I was thinking long term, and I was like, what am I doing? And I had this yearning to kind of, for like storytelling and filmmaking, and I thought, well, you know, I just didn't trust that surfing was going to be my like life engagement. And you know, I embarked, actually 1996, I started at this vocational, it's called Full Sail Center for the Recording Arts, and you know, I got
Of course, yeah.
a 2-year degree in motion picture technology. It was in that program, briefly, where I was like, you know, it was like a light bulb switch went on, and I was like, wait, how am I going to figure out like how to tell stories with 24 frames a second if I don't even understand one frame? So I actually went to a pawn shop and bought myself like at the time it was a lot of money. It was like $60, I think, for an AE1 Canon, and I never let that thing go. I started photographing and teaching myself photography while I was in this program in Central Florida, and kind of already transitioned completely out of like my 24-hour like surfing identity, and looking to kind of broaden, you know, myself. Yeah, so that's how I got into cinematography. But then as I graduated from that program, I was starting to photograph my brother, Jason, and he was modeling at the time, and his agent introduced me to someone who I was kind of naive to who he was, and he offered me a job, and it was Bruce Weber. And Bruce yeah. I showed up at Bruce's house in Golden Beach, and he asked me, "Well, what do you want to do with your life?" And he's like, and I was like, "Well, I want to be a photographer and I want to make films." And he's like, he just invited me to come on board, and that kind of brought me back to New York City. You know.
And you end up contributing a great deal as I don't want to overstate it, so help me not to. But one of the main cinematographers for his film Chop Suey, is that right?
Yeah, yeah. So Bruce, I worked for Bruce for 3 years, and I learned so much there. He gave me an opportunity to kind of start testing his motion picture cameras, his gear, and start testing them for his ongoing productions and commercials and work. So he knew I had this kind of urgency to kind of like do this thing, and I just kind of threw myself over the ledge of like taking on the responsibility back then. This is the late 90s. We're not talking ones and zeros. We're talking like analog. There's a lot on the line here in regards to the cost of film and processing and telecine. So I learned early on how to check his Bolexes and load them, and it just kind of evolved from there.
And just it seems that coming out of that experience, at a certain point, you had this. I've heard you talk about you looked in the mirror and you asked yourself, who am I? What do I want to say? And did that lead you then to apply? The other thing I find fascinating and impressive that you, without an undergraduate degree, applied to the MFA program at Columbia. Can you talk about how that came about?
Yeah. So I'll like to go back to Bruce. It was while I was working with Bruce rigorously that he also was very giving and very kind and supportive. And he gave me a book one Christmas called Knaves of Heart by Danny Lyon. And it was kind of like this biographical collage book about his, basically mapping out his evolution as a photographer. I read that, and it was like another moment where I was like, wait, like, and it was that moment, like looking into the mirror and asking myself, like, how am I spending my time? This isn't really me. And I was just more interested in actuality, a different actuality than like fashion and this kind of amazing kind of like opportunity that I had with Bruce. So,
but
I mean,
but I cut to the chase here, though. How
yeah.
do you get accepted at Columbia in the MFA program without an undergraduate degree? What's the hook there? How does that happen?
Well, that is like from the time that I left Bruce's to Columbia. Wow, that's like 11 years. So 11
Okay.
years of like freelancing um, in the city and shooting a Leica. Like I bought my first Leica when I was working with Bruce. When he showed us as assistants like this print that he had just bought of Henry Cartier-Bresson. I just, it was nothing but photography. This pursuit of like, of practice and of wanting to say something with a camera. So I mean,
Maybe
eventually, go ahead.
no, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say that Columbia, came to me at a time where I was questioning, like I needed to fill in a lot of gaps, and I was thinking long term. I wanted to teach because I didn't really see the industry. The industry was changing and stuff, but also I was changing, and I just needed more kind of formal understanding about what I was doing. So
Okay.
I
Gotcha.
basically wrangled in a lot of different photographers who I had worked with, including my ex-girlfriend at the time, who supported me in approaching Columbia. And I just showed up at Columbia's, with a bunch of work, really. a bunch of prints and stuff.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like
And
in this case, real world experience too, that really made a difference. And I want to use that as a segue to get you talking about your Dear New Yorker project, and also to bring up some pictures. We've got a lot of work to share, and I hope in this process, again, I want to encourage anyone to ask questions. We'll take a moment halfway through to try to answer as many of those as possible, but also, Joseph, to pull out not only what drives you, what inspires you, but also, what how you work. So,
right.
if you could start with the origins of the Dear New Yorker project, and we'll take a look at a few of the pictures.
Yeah, I mean, Dear New Yorker is just a part of my obsessive way of coping with the world and living in New York, um, and being active. You know, the actual title for the work was inspired by a letter that was Xeroxed in the early 2000s that I found on the street through in Hell's Kitchen, which was this letter that was written to New Yorkers, and it was like this bizarre um, finding that was disseminated all throughout the streets, telephone booths, you know, car windshield wipers, and it was like someone had littered this like letter to New York, and it was kind of cryptic, and it was kind of like also a protest letter, and that was the day I realized, well, whatever I end up like discovering, or wherever this ends up, I'm going to call this work Dear New Yorker. And that's how I've kind of harnessed all these fragments
Wait,
over 20
as
years.
yeah, this is now a 20-year body of work, and we're just going to be looking at a small selection of them. And I would encourage people after this to check out your website, where you have Dear New Yorker 1, Dear New Yorker 2, and you can see how the work is evolving. But talk a little bit about, you work in a documentary fashion, but I've heard you say, to you, it's all personal. Everything is personal when it comes to your process, the image making. What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, I find photography to be absolutely subjective, and it's the personal like gravity in me. It's the inner odyssey in a way, or the way I am built as a human being, that I channel from a deep place out, so it's like an internal and external cross point in regards to like my photographic practice. So I see it as a personal thing, that's that I'm doing, but it's obviously universal through its through the medium, because it's visual language
And
uh,
you just
at the
on
end.
a technical standpoint, from a technical standpoint, you started with the MP in a 35 millimeter f2.
Yeah, no, I mean, so for like 20 years, I mean, I'm still shooting this camera. This is the MP from 2003, and it's got a 1.4 spherical. I mean, this is my go-to camera. Love it. But this is the camera that made the work that's being projected or shared.
And what was it, just to start with, it's a Leica program. So, what was it about the Leica that attracted you? How did it fit with um, the way you like to work?
Well, at first, when I was first introduced to the camera, when I was working with Bruce, I was intrigued and fascinated by the technical like arc of like, what am I doing here? I'm like looking through a rangefinder, but the lens is off to the side. How am I going to figure out focus? I was actually like intrigued by that challenge of like mastering that instrument. And I was just such a camera person, you know. So I was just intrigued by like that aspect at first, and obviously I've become one with the tool for the longest of time, and I actually, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, this picture in particular, I know people are going to be interested in finding out your approach on the street, and not only in comfort with the gear, but is there a story behind this picture you could share with us?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, these two guys are two brothers, Kawani and his brother's name's almost the same. It's I'm actually blanking out on the second name, but this is done on 14th Street, and it's a collaborative um, portrait done on the street, very kind of intuitively and swiftly, but very considered. And yeah, it's the kind of photography that's not necessarily candid, but it's I don't know. I kind of enjoy the which is something that's not really happening so much today in the New York
Sure.
social landscape. I love talking to strangers and I love connecting with people. And I saw these two brothers and I thought they were beautiful and I you know just set them up and talked to them and took this picture on 14th
And
Street and First Avenue.
as we go through here, we're going to see there's a number of portraits, and I think people will be able to see throughout the collection here that can imagine you working on the street, and the mix of working candidly, and but when you do find someone you make a portrait of, I'm sure people who are listening are, it's one of the things, it's one thing to photograph and not be noticed, and there are techniques to go along with that, and the Leica and the smallness of the camera, the quickness certainly helps with that. But what is it that you do in terms of what people you want to approach? Uh, what what's the elevator pitch? What's the soundbite? How you explain what you're doing?
Um, it's pretty intuitive. I mean, it's the jump from shooting candidly into direct, engaged, and collaborative portraiture was again a challenge that I posed on myself to kind of like get out of my own shell and be more accountable to what I was curious about and what I kind of celebrate or point to visually. So it comes from again a very personal space of growth of wanting to kind of um, be very kind of varied as and pop and capable as a visual as a photographer. And I kind of hesitate saying storyteller, but I see myself coming from that tradition of storytelling in regards to like the single frame. But
I've heard you refer to photography for you as a coping mechanism. Expand on that. How does it? What does it help you cope with? What is?
well, it definitely keeps me occupied. It's an obsession, obviously, but it really, without photography, um, yeah, I would probably be. Um, I mean, in a way, I could say that photography saved me from sabotaging myself, you know, and the nature of being human. So photography makes me feel alive, and it's an ongoing possibility of a laboratory where I can learn from it, and I mean, I just love doing it. I love being out in the world, and I love just the uncertain place where I may end up through that process of being outside.
You've touched on something. I want to hear the story behind this picture, but I had in notes and preparing for this that, from a technical standpoint, you are preparing, pre-visualizing sometimes on the street a situation you want. You're preparing, but
Completely.
you're preparing to be prepared for something unexpected to happen. So you're ready when the moment arises. And how about this shot? I know you've got a story behind how this came about.
Yeah, I mean, like this guy, he was actually really a charming stranger. But for me at first, before introducing myself to him, I looked at it as like, wow, this guy was intimidating and also, but interesting. And I just wanted to kind of say hello. And he was on 34th Street, and I think this was just made, I want to say in 2017 or 18. But yeah, he had glasses on, and what's interesting about this portrait was that I had to get his glasses off because his energy, visually, physically, what he was projecting through his eyes was so I couldn't I couldn't really um, make sense of it. Like it was just like a lot of energy coming out, a lot of noise, and I'm talking about like energy from a human being projected out. So I asked him to close his eyes and take off his glasses, and I just found this one quiet moment of kind of introspection that was gifted to me. But these are the risks I take, and the thing that I like doing, which is just like being out in the world and photographing people that I find uh, intriguing or I'm curious about. So
There's been some questions in the chat window in terms of the way you look at light and
yeah,
the heavy blackness in a number of the images. The stark black and whites. Though I've been fortunate enough to see some of these images in print, and there actually is
yeah,
quite a bit of subtlety in the grays that we may not get here on the screen. And I know printing is a core part of your process, but start with light. How important is light, and how does that affect where you go make photographs?
I mean, I think it's like currently like I'm looking for a kind of emotional, rather a unique kind of lighting phenomenon outside that's uncontrollable as a starting point, as a location to look for photographs. So if the light isn't good, unfortunately, I kind of pass because I don't know. I think light brings on a whole nother possible dramatic character or kind of way of expressing things deeper. I just love light. I love being in the light. Literally, when the sun's out, it makes me feel like alive, I'm always kind of hunting for it. Yeah.
So, so this Dear New Yorker project, you are a New Yorker, and you've been working on it for 20 years now. But at the same
Too
time,
long.
this is an ongoing project. To Yeah, well, as you've made this commitment, it seems
Yeah.
like this is your baseline. It's your go-to ongoing project. But you've also been commissioned along the way to work on projects specific. Let's talk about this. The New York Museum, City Museum project,
Yeah. So,
and how did you approach that differently than this personal work, or did you?
well, there was a lot. There was a big leap of like kind of shifting and expanding my understanding of how to navigate the objective of the commission from the Museum City of New York in 2016, which was photographing in 20 different neighborhoods and kind of visualizing or showing a variety of social activities. So when I'm shooting personally, I'm motivated by light and human action and human beings in general. There's always a human component that's punctuated by light. But the commission for the museum was really kind of about reading the social landscape in a way where it spoke to like these different parts of New York that we all live in, social activities such as
So
housing,
you were given.
transportation.
So you, neighborhoods and specific subject matter that they wanted you to cover. Is that right?
Well, actually, I had locations, and then I had to kind of
Okay.
like show up this location and like find, realize, take, and make the picture I felt was fitting to meet the objective. So it was a dream assignment. I mean, it really, it also was an opportunity for me to work in color. And that was
Mhm.
when I focused, I mean, actually, the whole commission was in color. So it was a big leap from like my black and white personal practice work, like the bulk of my Dear New Yorker work, into kind of looking at New York in a way where I started understanding the kind of the grandeur of the social um, implications of what I was living in, you know, and
The fact that things were changing. You're living. I mean, in
yeah,
one of the
things were
cities that
changing.
changes every yeah.
Things were challenging and changing, and looking at these different social activities actually after the commission made me think twice about like, well, wait, is this actually even sustainable here? Because I think by the end of the commission, I had a different um, perspective on so many different aspects of what we were really
Give me
doing.
one. What? Give me one. What's one of the biggest things in the course of that project that changed for you,
Well, I
perspective
mean,
wise?
looking at housing and how it was like all these like huge glass uh, buildings were being built in Long Island City, and I was like, what is this? This is turning into kind of like Shanghai or something. And they were predicting at the time that that area was going to like be the next Times Square. And so housing was a little scary because things just keep getting taller. And there's more and more housing, and yeah, so housing and actually to nature, how we live with nature. Looking at
I see.
uh,
Yeah.
how how we live, issues of climate change and how many trees do we have left in the city and stuff like
Right.
that, as opposed to like this concrete landscape that I get lost in and I enjoy getting lost
Yeah.
in photographing.
Well, I
Uh,
want to get back to some of your pictures to that point, and let me start with the one that's on the screen. And I mean, clearly, for those everybody's listening, last best chance to get some questions in. We're going to move to your questions in just a little bit. I've known Joseph for a while, and you've taught a number of workshops for the Academy, and you are a sought after instructor both for the Academy and at a number of colleges in New York, and you've lectured quite often. And but I've never had the great opportunity to just ask you these questions directly. So I appreciate you giving
Thanks,
us
Tom.
the chance and sharing your point of view with the audience. Uh, but I'd be remiss in looking at these pictures if I didn't ask you this question. I was trying to come up with titles for what we're going to call this, right? And we went with seeing and
Right.
feeling because you clearly uh, are, navigating your personal journey in photography, and that, in fact, we won't really get to this concept you have of that you're it's personal reportage. It's not necessarily street photography. In fact, you don't even like that category or label, but it's a
Yeah.
personal reportage. And hold that thought for a moment, because the thing I want to ask you about is this: when I was trying to come up with titles, one
Mhm.
was process, patience, and pigeons. What's the story with the pigeons? There's a
Man,
lot of pigeons in your photography.
I just love birds in general. It's just I see them as like messengers of the spirit, and I get there's a deep satisfaction in just being close to the pigeons and watching them fly. I mean, at one point when I was living in Harlem, early 2000s, I used to film Mike Tyson's pigeons from my window, and I didn't know they were Mike Tyson's pigeons until a while. But I ended up like meeting. I introduced myself one night to Mike Tyson, not because he was Mike Tyson, but because I wanted to get on his rooftop to get a closer opportunity to film the pigeons flying. And this was like 2002. I mean, I love birds. Um, they're challenging, they're beautiful, they're cathartic. Some people are scared of them. Some people think they're flying rats. I think they're beautiful, they're smart, and it's just a personal. Again, I love birds. especially New York pigeons.
Well,
Yeah,
that definitely comes out, and I think the your background as a cinematographer, you know, when we look through the sequencing of the shots we're looking at here, you I know that tension in a frame, the lighting, composition is very important to you, uh, but it's the sequencing that I think your narrative really starts to come out. And if you could share with the audience as we look through a few more of these, how do you find a narrative no matter where you are? What is it that
yeah.
stops you? What is it you're looking for?
Well, I mean, obviously, the narrative that's implied and suggested in sequencing like singular photographs, is much different than the idea of the potential uh, story or narrative, or the thing that's happening in front of you, right? And I think I'm just like propelled to kind of like make sense of what I feel and see as like this ongoing game of like framing and this like almost like this filmmaker that's always kind of sussing out like what's in front of me and how do I make it most clear, like what is it. I mean, it could be it could be like a gesture, it could be an action, it could be a sound that moves me closer to humans and human beings outside. And
The
I don't know if that
gesture, your
answered
point
it.
about gesture. No, I mean, that's,
Yeah,
I think it certainly touches on
it's
it. And gesture seems to be one of the big qualifiers for you of a successful frame.
totally. But I mean, on top of that, like there's gesture. I think the key to like photography is understanding that we live in spaces where we project energy and receive energy, and that could be positive or negative. And I think as you're out in the world with your camera, it's it'll be to your benefit to think about energy and what you're saying without actually without you verbalizing it in regards to what opportunities kind of open up in front of you. So I don't know. That's one way of answering the question.
Yeah. So you were talking about, when you talk about energy, you're talking about it's your inner thoughts as well as, you know, how does that manifest itself in your body language with people on the street? Or,
Yeah, it's your perception and the energy that you're bringing to a place, right? And I think if you're able to kind of keep that open and vulnerable, and you're open to taking risks, then it's actually kind of thrilling to have a camera in your hand and go on these kind of pursuits of discovery, in a way.
Yeah, I
So
love that idea, that you're prepared, that it is a pursuit of discovery, but and clearly from a technical standpoint, you've gotten, you know, where the camera feels like a right, you know, it's a tool that is just becomes a part of you. Your perception, anticipation, you're ready for these moments. But I've often, you know, I've also read you feel like you have to give something of yourself. So I want to push you a little bit.
yeah, yeah.
Explain this picture. What is it you give of yourself?
Um, wow, this picture is a beautiful portrait of Xavier Simmons. She's an amazing African American artist, and this was kind of a setup portrait for, at the time, this magazine called Flat Magazine. So I actually went to Xavier's studio on Bedford Avenue, and we did this photograph. Um, yeah, I mean, giving yourself over to like the process, the creative process, it's like, I guess what I'm trying to say is like you gotta have to. it's reciprocal. You have to like let it out in order to kind of like it to
There's a give
reciprocate,
and
you know?
take. Sure, sure,
Yeah,
sure.
there's a
Yeah.
give and take, but there's a vulnerability and a sensitivity that you need to kind of widen in order to get close, intimate, or to kind of make poetry. I don't know. I don't know what
Yeah,
the
I mean,
formula
yeah,
is to be a poet, but
sure.
it's
Well, but there you've said it. I mean, that's the piece in terms of this personal reportage. It, it is very much your reaction to whatever situations you're finding yourself in. I mean, you're not when you've often said you're trying you photograph to find truth, but that truth is not only subjective, but it's a personal truth, right?
yeah. I mean, it's a very. I mean, it's definitely my truth, but then there's the audience's truth, right, and your truth. So there's a variety of different truths that make up how you read what I'm sharing and giving back to the world visually. Um,
But to that point, like, how much do you want to share in terms of the backstories of some of these pictures, or is it more important for you for there to be a mystery for people not necessarily to know the whole story behind them?
yeah, I kind of like dance back and forth between that. I mean, you know, like this picture, it was from 2006 on 23rd Street, and I basically walked up to a cab because I saw this light falling on this lady's profile and this kind of like situation that revealed itself as it is. And I shot 3 frames before like this cabbie um, pulled down 23rd Street going westbound. I remember the moment vividly in my head. But I mean, this is an aspect of photography where you're just kind of like you're hunting and you're kind of like not asking for permission and you're candidly hopefully getting it can be problematic in a way, but look, I mean, this is something that was given to me through that pursuit at an early part of my practice where I was like free and naive and hungry and like and just like completely hunting for moments and not really overthinking the process, right? So this is a very visceral moment that was just that was taken. Uh, I mean,
Well,
actually, I'll
and
say one more
and
thing if anybody cares.
please,
That was
sure.
3200 T-Max back then.
Yeah, actually,
Uh,
I'm going to try to pull in a number of questions here, Joseph, and people are asking. So, if you have one, your go-to film most of the time for this project, what's it been?
I mean, my go-to film in general is Tri-X, and then I always have like high-speed 3200 T-Max. Um, so those are two of my stocks. Kodak film is my go-to film.
Good. Okay.
Yeah. You.
And we're going to, for everyone asking about Joseph's history shooting with the MP and shooting film, and then his transition to the Leica Q. Hang in there. We're going to get to the Leica Q Monochrom conversation in just a moment. Before we get there, how about this? We've looked at your straight up portraits, the collaborative process, but there are also a number of moments within this Dear New Yorker project where I'm aware of your presence. And this one as an example.
Yeah, I love
I,
this
you know,
picture.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is just a rare encounter, and I mean, we're going back to that idea of like giving you a footnote or behind the scenes, like
Uh-huh.
point of view of like how I realize this. But I saw this lady walk by, and it was like I think it was late spring of 2019. It was it was really cold, and I was having soup at one of my favorite places in the Lower East Side, Gina's Grill, which is like a little Latin diner. And I frequent this place a lot. It's on like First Avenue, just in the Lower East Side. So I looked out, and this lady walked by. Her profile, I was just like, my jaw dropped like quietly, and I was like, she seemed like she walked out of a different time zone or planet. And I literally ran out of the diner, the little greasy spoon spot, and took one frame and walked back in. And this was it. It was just like this like very intuitive, like timed and kind of like fluid gesture of like kind of engaging with someone directly with no spoken language other than just like, all right, you're amazing, and I'm gonna just take this picture. And then I walked away, and she just kept walking. But literally, this was just one frame, like 1,000, like 4.5, and boom, walked
Gotcha,
into it,
gotcha.
walked out, and
And how
yeah,
often,
sometimes
Joseph? I mean, this one as well. I got to imagine. I mean, many times How often are you successful with that? Where it's one or two frames? It's where Is that you have a good hit
I
rate
mean,
with that in terms of keepers?
I mean, there's a lot of pictures that it fluctuates. There's a lot of pictures that are one off like that, um, and then there's a lot of pictures where a scene is kind of worked through, and you like kind of you build into it, and there's like maybe a climax or a point where things fall into place and give you a result that's satisfying. But it's there's so many different ways. Sometimes you don't even know you made a picture, and you look at your negatives and you're like, oh my god, and you're surprised, and that's a beautiful thing too. But yeah,
And
it's
so for you, and to that point, in terms of surprises, I mean, certainly when you're shooting the MP, you have these pictures in your head of what you hope you've captured. You go back, you either work with a lab or you make your contact sheets. How how has that been different for you shooting with the Leica Q Monochrom and the immediate response? Is there anything
well,
is there anything that you've done in your workflow to replicate that delay, or are you
no, it's a
watching your images right
completely
away?
yeah, no, it's a completely it's a complete departure. It's a different tool. It's a different process. It's super immediate. Um, yeah, it's totally different. So I embraced that the Q2 Monochrom in when was it? I got a camera sent to me in the middle of September, and I shot the Q2 for like a month straight, and at that point, we were all in like crazy quarantine, and I remember just kind of letting go and saying, I'm just going to embrace this thing and go with the flow and just try to enjoy photography in a way where I felt like the rest of our world was like kind of on fire. and and I just embraced this technology, and I was like super, super impressed. I mean, I was like touch focusing mostly with the monochrome, and yeah, man, it's a totally different tool, and the files are pretty sick. The phenomenal
We're
mid-tone.
gonna look at that some of those pictures here in just a moment. Is there one last story before we go to the Q2 pictures? Was there a story in this?
This picture was, you know, just one of those candid moments that you walk into when the light's right, and some person was like doing what he's doing, and I basically it was light and the body language, the movement that attracted me to get close and just frame this and take the picture. So it's kind of like a dance, or like I'm almost like a performative, like it's like a jazz type of thing where when you're out there and you see life happening, you kind of like meet that. And yeah, I didn't speak with this person, but it was just one of these moments that was beautiful, and everything kind of fit in place. Not only what he's expressing, but the lighting up his button-up shirt, almost
Yeah.
like a light fixture, and the body language
Yeah.
is pretty spectacular.
Striking, yeah. Well,
Yeah, it's
this
striking.
is our last image before we go to a couple of questions. But but really, I mean, when I look at, and again, I might be, part of me if I'm projecting a little bit, but it sounds like
Go
you're
ahead.
open to this. You're open to people's reactions to the work. And
Completely.
again, at the risk of projecting a little bit, if you talk about, you're putting yourself into the work, and your own subjective truth. When I look at your work from the Dear New Yorker project, I vacillate between feeling like this is a document of a city waiting for some impending doom, and these tender human moments that maybe will save us. From one frame to the next, I feel like this tension between the hopefulness and an impending doom. Is that, do you relate with that? Am I onto something, or is that just my head?
I think, well, no, I think you're kind of onto something. I mean, Dear New Yorker, of all my different projects that I've got kind of that I'm building, um, there's really no, I mean, if there's any intention in regard to social statement and storytelling, it exists when I'm sequencing the singular pictures. But by no means in that work was I out in the world thinking about like, an agenda
An
to force
agenda.
on
Oh,
anybody.
that's thank you for
Yeah,
sharing that. And we're actually, let's go to
yeah.
questions, and I'll get in a few of the audience questions here. So
There's
that's
no agenda.
you've okay. So when you're working, what are you thinking about? Because you've rejected this idea that you just go out and you're not thinking. You are thinking, but you're not thinking of an agenda. What are you thinking about?
Well, it's a beautiful moment of human contradiction, right? It's like you're one foot in, one foot out. Um, what am I thinking about? Um, Losing myself, but also connecting with people. So it's a dance of like wanting to be left alone and wanting to transcend from like this reality. But then also there's a longing at times, just as we wake up and we have different emotions throughout the day. Then there's sometimes a longing to kind of get close and talk to people. Um,
Okay. Okay.
does that make
So
sense?
this
Yeah.
image, it does. No, it does. I mean, I think that there's a through line in this desire to connect, and make sense of what's happening in the world from a personal point of view. Whether you're shooting a film camera, or in this case, the Q2 Monochrome, and the next few shots are from the Q2 Monochrome. So, other than the fact that it's a 28 millimeter lens, different
Yeah.
than the 35 you're used to using,
Yeah.
your experience using the touch screen, talk to us about that on the back. How did that change the way you worked?
Well, I enjoyed the touch screen because when I found out that I could actually crop into it and do a kind of like simulated 35 millimeter focal length, I could use the screen as like a imitation rangefinder, because you have much more
Mhm.
space than the edges of uh, of the frame. So if you shoot the Q2 full frame, it's you're using like a fixed 28, but I used it completely with the 35 crop settings for the reason of like wanting to see more uh, outside my frame, which is
And
kind of something.
when you work with the M10P,
Right.
do you work with filters, or when you're shooting film, did you work with filters then?
No filters ever until the Q2. Now I got this orange thing that's amazing. I don't know if you could see it, but
I
yeah,
can, yeah. So that's definitely
yeah.
responsible, I think, for some of the high contrast. But how much of that is also post processing for you? How much post processing did you do of these files?
I was completely impressed by how many times I turned those raws. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of work done to them, but
Mhm.
that's my nature. Just like if I was in the dark room, I would be dodging and burning and using different contrast filters or different papers or actually different developers to get the tonal expression that I need or want
Yeah.
out of the negative. Digitally speaking, I work the same way, except I'm on the screen through Photoshop, right? Yeah, what I think is unique about this monochrome technology which is there's this bizarre, amazing kind of midtone that is really on its own kind of, it's like very distinct. That doesn't exist when you just like convert a color file to a monochrome, a
Right,
digital
right.
file.
And do you find, so when you were shooting with the M10P, and
Right.
you've got a color camera, and when you wanted black and white, you would just shoot film previous to using
Yeah,
the monochrome? Okay.
completely. I actually, with the M10P, I use it and accept it as color. And that's the camera I usually do assignments with because usually, it depends. But yeah, the M10P, I would never convert those files into black and white because I was just I'm still so satisfied with film. But I have to say, I think now I'm like itching for the M10 monochrome because, it's similar technology. And I think the rangefinder suits me more than an EVF type thing, which is totally doable, but you kind of need like bionic eyes to manually focus in that EVF. And as you can see, I wear
Oh, so
glasses and I have like,
are, but the EVF in the M10, or I'm sorry, in the Q monochrome, you found the EVF easy to focus, or you preferred to actually hold. In the video, I noticed you're holding the camera out, which surprised me.
yeah, no, I mean that holding out was this kind of new, like I said, it was like this departure of letting go of what I knew and embarking a totally different methodology, or like,
Mm.
and using the technology that was in the camera to kind of see where I went with it. All in all, it's impressive, but I would say I totally need and want like the analog rangefinder as a way of like working. So that's why I'm like I
Okay.
want the M10
E-
monitor.
Even though I had to bring up you did share you're going to miss the close focus capability that you've got with the Q to make a picture
Yeah,
like
yeah,
this.
yeah. This is an amazing story. At least I thought it was when it happened. So I was in line in a supermarket and I started hearing this like bird tweeting, and I was like, I thought I was like losing my mind because it wasn't like the speakers above that were like that had some kind of music in supermarket music. And I looked at the person behind me and I was like, do you hear a bird? He's like, oh no, there's no bird here. And I'm like, listen, that bird sound is not coming from the speakers above. And I looked down further down the line and there's this parakeet jumping on this guy's shoulder. And I was just like, that's wild. This guy's bringing a bird into the supermarket. So I checked out and I waited for him outside. And I used that kind of like, unscripted, way of like embracing moments and engaging with him. And I asked him if I could take his picture. And that's when I used the macro option on the Q2 macro is crazy. It's
It
beautiful.
really makes it
Uh,
a versatile setup. Some of the questions we've gotten, Joseph, can you share what your settings were with working with the monochrome? Are you aperture priority manual? How are you shooting with it? I can tell looking at the
yeah,
metadata, almost everything we've looked at was 800 ISO. In fact, we'll
yeah,
just go back here just for a moment, with the exception of this shot,
that.
which was 3200 ISO, right? But other than
Yeah.
the ISO, how did you work with the camera? What were your settings?
Well, I mean, my approach in general is very mechanical and manual in regards to like setting my aperture and shutter is a constant like game of selection and intuitive kind of response to like reading light and setting my camera. So I never rely on like automated exposure options in any of my cameras. What I did rely on with the Q2 monochrome was the autofocusing So usually, depending on what was in front of me, I would already know that I would need, the light was doing this. So I was already kind of set at an ISO for that light, and I would need a shutter speed that would meet whether it was a moving subject or not. I mean, there's so many variables that are like processed quickly that crystallize into kind of like, okay, well, I'm at 1,000, 4.5, at 800. But that's kind of like my music in a way, like doing that whole thing. And so it was just auto focusing with the screen what is it? I use this autoface single and continuous mode for the most
Okay.
part,
Yeah.
and it
Yeah.
was pretty,
Yeah. It's
pretty successful.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's the Q. Most of the time, I mean, we've worked together and we were teaching workshops for the Academy. We talk about the value of zone focusing and certainly knowing a lens inside out, so that you are able to get and know it by feel.
Yeah.
And though that I think those skills are certainly very valid and needed when it comes to a manual focus camera, when you're working with the Q, whether it's the color Q or the monochrome, I found it less necessary to be in manual focus. I need to make sure I have my aperture set, so I've got the distance I need, proper exposure. But in terms of focusing, the focus on all of the Qs, whether it's the first one or the second edition of the Q, has just been fast. So I leave it in autofocus most of the time.
Yeah. I mean,
You
I'm
did the same? Yeah.
constantly, yeah. I mean, I left the focusing pretty much on auto. Uh, and then, it's just kind of like a dance of like figuring out, all right, well, what's in front of me and what is it that I want to say and what depth of field do I need, and calculating these things really quickly and responding to it viscerally, intuitively, and having my camera set, so I'm just like as
Right.
free to kind of like engage whatever's in front of me. Yeah, I mean, focusing manually on the Q2 monochrome is doable, you know, but I prefer, again, that clear. It's like I'm old school. I don't need a TV up to my eyeball, right? I
And
mean,
you
electronic.
mentioned you mentioned your old school, and as we start to wrap up here, what does that mean to you? What is old school greatness? This thing you strive for in terms of old school greatness. What does that mean to
I
you?
mean, it's kind of funny, the whole thing, actually. I'm loyal to 19th century tradition that started with like Ache onward, and a certain kind of, I don't know if you want to call it Sharkowski like canon of photography that John Sharkowski is what I'm saying, of photography that is still gives me that pulse of like joy, and and it's still inspiring to me. So
Right, right.
yeah, it's like old. That it's not that it's old. It's just a different tradition as opposed to like like.
Maybe a better word
Go
is
ahead.
classic. That it's these are traditions that there's a through
Yeah,
line to the history of photography that doesn't go away, but that you still um, seem to adhere to, in that you hold yourself to a very high standard, and you're not looking for quick results in terms of your projects. I mean, 20 years, dear New Yorker,
yeah.
and
I'm not.
would you
I'm not
right?
looking for likes on Instagram. That's for sure. But I mean, I love photography, and and I like taking my time. I think as I gotten older, it's like time is everything, right? I mean, giving yourself the time to work, to understand what your pictures may mean, or how living with your work and understanding what you want to put out in the world, is all very meaningful to me. So I just don't really buy into this like the speed in which we disseminate images these days is just kind of overwhelming, and
What
questionable, right?
we're almost to the end here, and I want to give you an opportunity, Joseph. Is there anything with the people who are listening in terms of a takeaway or advice that you would give people listening? And I appreciate your vulnerability and willingness to kind of share a bit of your history. And but is there anything, I want to make sure we've covered it. Is there anything you'd like to
Yeah,
add?
yeah. You know, as a Cuban Puerto Rican, like New Yorker, born in New York, it's like you just got to be yourself, you know? You got to be true to yourself and you got to trust yourself. And, you know, I think we're living in a moment now where you really have to ask yourself, like, why are you picking up a camera? Because I think the days of like the way most of us operated in the past is really not, I mean, I think we're in a time right now where you have to be more thoughtful than ever about why you're standing in front of somebody with a camera.
Mm, mm.
And I think that comes out through your pictures, you know, I'm not out there to be anybody but Joseph Michael Lopez. It didn't happen overnight, and I don't know where I'm going, but I know, you know, that I'm not really interested in anything else other than just being my truest self,
Mm.
and there's satisfaction in that. And the way I've given meaning to my life is through this purpose of like teaching and photographing what's in front of me. So in a very committed way. Um, so
That's
yeah,
great. Yeah,
I hope
yeah.
that's some kind of
No,
good
no,
takeaway.
that's great. No, it's a great takeaway, and I think it's really spot on too. We could let so a couple things we want to let people know about. If we'll bring a slide up of how people can stay in touch with you and some things that we have coming up.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Yeah, those are some more
Specifically,
Q2.
I'm gonna go. Yeah, we'll wrap up with those last few shots there. More Q2,
Yeah,
and picking up on what you're talking about, what you shared there in terms of, I'm going to go back to something we mentioned at the very beginning, that you had a moment where you looked at yourself in the mirror and you said, what is it you want to say? What is it you want to do in this medium? And it sounded like that was a moment that really was a touchstone or a turning point for you. And now, through the Academy, I want to let people know that you are offering for a limited time these bespoke programs. So if someone would like to have you look at their portfolio or help with an edit, or it actually says in the description, help them look in themselves in the mirror and ask what it is they want to do, what is it they want to have to say, in your voice. The description kind of talks about some of the objectives that you can help someone accomplish through this program.
yeah.
So
I mean,
I'd encourage everybody to check that out.
yeah, I'd be grateful and happy to guide anybody, to provoke them to think deeper and more critically about who they are and what they're doing and how they're spending their time and dealing with the results of a photographic practice. So
Perfect. And
yeah,
over the winter break, I know you had a print sale that was wildly successful, and I encouraged you that we're going to do this Leica Conversations, and if you wanted to extend it, you could, and you did. So if anyone is interested in this print sale, you could show them what they get there.
yeah. So
Uh,
these are 5x7 uh, prints, signed, stamped, and dated, and the images are 6.5 inches on the longest side, and this that image and this image and this image will be available to purchase as small collector's prints till the end of the month. Yeah, I was
and we're
really
going to put your
grateful for a successful print sale in December. So we're going to do that till the end of the month.
Great. And we'll put your contact information, Joseph, in the chat window, and I encourage everybody to take advantage of that. Joseph, it's been a pleasure. I'm sure this is a program that people are going to want to go back and re-listen to. We covered a lot of information in a short amount of time. So it will be eventually posted on Leica Camera USA's YouTube channel. So be on the lookout for that. Thanks
Thank you,
very
Tom.
much. I look forward
Thanks,
where I can see
everybody.
you again in person. Want to let everyone watching know the next program we have coming from Leica Camera. I think we've got a
It is.
slide to give you that info. I'll stay in touch with you. Website information, email,
Cool.
or your Instagram. Even though you're not looking for likes, you wouldn't mind a few more followers. So go ahead and check out his
I mean,
work there.
yeah. I mean, it's a good place to have a
Yeah,
dialogue, but yeah. Thanks,
definitely,
Tom.
definitely. Yeah, no, and I got to tell you, one of my favorite images on there actually is a color image of a chair that I almost put in the program, but we're focused on a black and white, so we'll bring it back for a color
Yeah.
program in the future.
Right.
So
You
everybody,
you could
next
have brought
coming
it up.
next program coming up is going to be January 28th. It's our new series called Leica Tech Talks. And for anybody in the question and answer that we're looking for, more detailed information about, what's the difference between shooting with an M10R and shooting with a monochrome, looking for those technical details. What are the differences between the sensor? And that's what our Tech Talks are all about. So I encourage you all to sign up and watch the program next Thursday, 4 o'clock, and continue. We'll do these once a month, the Tech Talks, in addition to our ongoing Leica conversations. Joseph, thank you once again.
Thank
Everyone,
you,
it's been a
everybody.
pleasure.
Thank you, everybody who's kind of shared this Leica conversations in the last couple days. I'm really grateful for the dialogue in the sport, and yeah, keep in touch. Thank you, Tom Smith and Leica Camera USA and Leica Germany, LFI team, everybody, Kieran, Danny, Jason. You know who you guys are. Grateful
Thank,
for your support.
thanks for being with us, everybody. We'll see you next time on Leica Conversations.
Shaka, thank you.